I want to ask you about, summer of '97. Everything's going well for you. You've turned babyface. Dude Love's there. But in the background, it seems like every week there's backstage drama with Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. There's fights. There's comments made on TV. What was it like being in the locker room and being around while this is happening on a seemingly weekly basis?
Yeah, I don't know if it was as regular. It may have been underneath the surface. But I was there when the fight took place between, I didn't see it, but I saw the aftermath. And then Shawn left the company. And I remember Jim Cornette calling me up and said, "Cactus, your ship has just come in." And so they put a lot more emphasis on especially Dude Love. And then, unfortunately, I was supposed to be the opponent for Brian Pillman, where he didn't show up, and we found out that he passed away. And that was heartbreaking. But and I don't know what kind of match we would have had, because Brian, I was in the car with Brian the night before, and he was in a bad way, and they found him in that hotel room. But Dude was in for a big push, as Dude Love, and then things went the other way with the different characters. I don't recall it being all that chaotic until the Montreal Screwjob. And that was, it might be the same thing. You remember the really good and the really bad, but I don't recall there being a lot of unpleasantness up until the Montreal Screwjob, aside from the fight. And the fight took place the same night as the comment that Shawn Michaels made, which was way out of hand and totally unnecessary, to say something that's so inside the business that only the guy and his family will even know what he's talking about. But other than that segment and that fight, I don't remember it being an unhappy time in the dressing room up until the Montreal Screwjob.
Let's talk about Montreal, because you're the one person who had I don't want to say you walked out, but you went home. You weren't going to come back. Talk about seeing what was happening and why that gave you such a strong reaction to go, I'm not taking this.
Well, Rick Rude actually left companies. He switched over to WCW, so he made the bigger protest, I would say. In my case, if I had my rental car, I would have been out of Montreal, but I had been given a ride, me and Owen, with a guy named Ronnie Gaff, and so my car was hundreds of miles away. But I just remember, almost like it was on repeat. I just kept saying the words, "You don't do that to Bret Hart. You don't do that to Bret Hart." And I was rooming with Kane that night, and Kane was pretty happy because Mankind and Kane had a pretty good match, including a really spectacular-looking spot where he choke-slammed me off the apron. And what I did is, taking a page out of Curt Hennig's book, when I didn't think, Curt was a spectacular wrestler, but he had a different style of bumping than I did. But I remember when he was working with Hogan, and Hogan would give him a header into the turnbuckle, Curt would do this spectacular flip and a twist, and I was like, that's not the way I want to sell turnbuckles, but I'm going to remember that little spring off the bottom rope. So when Glenn grabbed me for the goozle, I put my left foot on that rope, and I got probably an extra 12 to 18 inches of hang time and distance, and took what would have been a good bump into a really nice bump. And then because of what went down in the main event, nobody recalls a single thing about that match I had with Kane. But this was like his first pay-per-view match, and he called his wife Crystal, and he said, "Yeah, Mick really put me over nice." And I stayed home. I stayed in my hotel, and I was thinking there was going to be some form of contrition. And instead, I saw them bring out, a little person dressed up as Bret, and they browbeat him, and I was intent on not coming back to the company. I will backtrack for a second, is that I talked to Owen after it happened, and I said, "What happened? What went on backstage?" And he said, "Bret went to take his shower. He said to Vince, 'If you're still here when I get back, I'm going to punch you right in the mouth.'" There's my F-bomb for you. And so I said, "So when he got out of the shower, Vince was gone, right?" He said, "No, Vince was there." I said, "So what happened?" He said, "Bret punched him right in the mouth." And I remember saying to Owen, I said, "Did he get dressed before he did it?" He said, "No." And I said, so it wasn't just a knockout, it was a naked knockout. And I think, as far as naked knockouts go, it was the best naked knockout there is, the best naked knockout there was, best naked knockout there will ever be. This was meaningful, though, because I called my wife, and we talked for quite a while. I think I talked to Jim Ross, too. When I hung up the phone, my message light was blinking, and it was Vince McMahon leaving a message after he'd just been knocked out by a naked man. And I thought, I must be really important, to this company. And then my wife reread my contract that next night and said, Mick, you just breached your contract. Like, legally, you can't work anywhere in the world for the next 5 years. So I did come back 2 days later. All was forgiven. And it was a really unfortunate scenario. But it did give rise to the Mr. McMahon character, and then the Mr. McMahon character played so well against Steve and to some extent off of me. And so for WWE, it was, they turned lemons into lemonade. But for Bret, I don't think he was never quite the same. He wasn't a WCW guy. He was a WWE guy. And then, he had the injury from Goldberg, and I think if you ask Bret about it, he'll mention it from time to time. Thank you, appreciate it.
To the point where when we did the Bret Hart tour in September, we finished in London, and I don't know if you know this, Bret Hart's quite slow at meet and greets, if you are aware of that. He takes a long time to do these meet and greets, and the venue said, we need to be out by 11. Like, customers, crew, you need to be out by 11. I asked him a question about Goldberg at 10:35. We didn't get out by 11. And we had to pay a curfew fee because of Bret Hart talking about Goldberg.
But wait, if I can tell you this, I love Bret, I really do. And one of the nicest things I've ever read is Bret's niece, Lindsay. And if you read Natty's new book, Natty's one of the nicest people you meet, not just in the wrestling business, but anywhere. And she's talking about her dad and the CTE suffered, and it's really written well, and it's a beautiful book. If you have a chance to read it, please do. But I'm talking about Lindsay, who was another one of Bret's nieces, and she would come and open shows for me, and her boyfriend, who's still her boyfriend, was a really, really good independent wrestler. And she took me by the Hart house so I could see it one last time. And when I dropped her off, she had a card for me. And she said, please don't open this until you get to your room. And I get back to my room, and I read the card. It says, Mick, you remind me so much of my Uncle Owen that when I'm with you, I feel like he's still here. And I had to fight back tears when I read that. So I take a lot of pride in, my relationship with the Hart family, so much so that when I was driving the roads with Terry Funk, like in the early, probably mid-2015, somewhere around there. He asked me if I'd ever wrestled in Calgary, done my show in Calgary. And I said, yeah, I have. And he was like, were any of the Harts there? And I said, yeah. And he said, how many? I said, 17. And he said, you're telling me there were 17 Harts at your show? And I said, yeah. And he put his hand on my knee. He said, do you know how big of a compliment that is? I said, I know. Terry, I'm not telling you they were all sitting together or talking with each other, but there were 17 Harts there. And this is one of those great audibles I ever called, is that we see Uncle Bret in the background, right? He's taking a low profile. And I said to Lindsay, I said, see if Uncle Bret wants to do the Q&A with me. And 5 minutes later, she comes back and says, with her thumb up like this. And Tommy Billington, Dynamite Kid's daughter, Bronwyn, is in the audience, And so I know she idolizes her dad, misses her dad, knocked on his door after she hadn't seen him in like 10 years, knocked on his door in the UK and said, I'm your daughter, and you will have a relationship with me. He looked at her and said, come on in. And they were able to have a father-daughter relationship for the rest of Dynamite's life. But I know how much she idolizes her dad, so I asked the first question. I was like, Bret, can you tell me what it was like to be in the ring with Dynamite Kid? Because I've heard Bret say he was the best wrestler he'd ever been in the ring with. And Bret goes, Tommy was a mean guy. And I see Bronwyn in tears, like he goes on for 5 minutes about Tommy being a mean guy. And then he finally says, if you wrestled him hard and earned his respect, you could have the best matches of your career with him. And then the next question comes in, and I've got Georgia Smith out there, Davey's daughter, and the question is legitimately, what was it like to face Davey Boy Smith at Wembley Stadium? And Bret goes, Davey'd been doing a lot of cocaine. And now you got Georgia in tears. And I mean, I do. I love Bret. I love you, Bret. And but we all have to have some fun at each other's expense. And I just remember, not only was that a little strange, but when we went into the back, the venue in Calgary literally had a broom closet for a green room. And so Bret and I are sitting opposite sides of the broom closet, and our knees are touching as we wait for people to file out. But I do. I mean, I love the fact that I'm well thought of in the Hart household.